The intersection at Elm and 3rd was a bustling place, notorious for its dangerous traffic flow, even for those who could see clearly. But for Samuel Bell, a 78-year-old blind veteran, it was a familiar crossing, one he navigated with the unwavering assistance of his service dog, Guide. They had made this journey countless times before, Sam relying on his sharp hearing, the rhythmic tap of his white cane, and the steady pull of Guide's harness. That day, as usual, Sam stood patiently at the corner, waiting for the audible pedestrian signal to change. Guide sat calmly at his side, sensing the familiarity of the moment. When the chirping sound indicated it was safe to cross, Sam gave Guide the command, and the two began their careful journey across the street. Little did they know, this crossing would be unlike any other. Around the corner, two young officers, Miller and Davis, were finishing their coffee break in their patrol car. Bored and eager for something to break the monotony of their shift, they spotted Sam and Guide halfway across the intersection. The pedestrian signal had already started to flash, "Don't walk," but neither officer paused to consider the situation. They only saw an old man moving slowly, an obstacle to the flowing traffic. "Look at this old guy," Officer Miller muttered, a smirk forming on his face. "Taking his sweet time, gonna cause an accident." Davis, eager to join in, added, "Probably drunk or on something." They didn't take a moment to consider the white cane, the service dog vest, or the fact that Sam had every right to be there, crossing safely. Instead, they saw a problem, a disruption to their otherwise dull shift. The officers were restless, looking for something to break the monotony. They didn't see Sam and Guide as a blind veteran in need of assistance, but rather as an inconvenience. Miller hit the siren briefly, just enough to draw attention, and then blared the PA system. "Hey, you in the crosswalk, get a move on, light's changing," he shouted, his voice harsh and commanding. Sam, disoriented by the sudden blare and the confusion of where it was coming from, faltered. His senses were overloaded, the rush of traffic, the sudden noise, the panic and Guide's pulling on the harness. Sam's heart started to pound in his chest. He knew the situation was becoming dangerous, but his senses failed him in that moment. Guide was hesitant, unsure of what was happening. He stood still, his ears alert, trying to guide Sam away from the confusion. "I said move it," Miller repeated, his tone growing more frustrated. "Are you deaf and blind?" Sam's pulse quickened. The chaos around him intensified, cars honking impatiently, the bright traffic lights flashing, and the officer's words echoing in his head. He tapped his cane more urgently, trying to regain his bearings. But the voices were overwhelming, the air heavy with the anxiety of the moment. His cane tapped more rapidly, but Sam was now directly in the path of oncoming traffic. The green light was on, the cars inching forward, and he was stuck in the middle of it. The officers, seeing what they believed to be disobedience rather than confusion, saw an opportunity to act. Davis reached for his radio, calling it in as a pedestrian obstructing traffic. "Looks like he's resisting," he said, misjudging the situation entirely. Miller, filled with adrenaline and a misplaced sense of authority, made a fatal decision. He leapt from the car, drawing his taser. "Sir, stop resisting. Stay on the sidewalk. I warned you." Sam, already overwhelmed by the situation, tried to call out. "I'm trying. I'm blind," he said, his voice thin with fear. But it was too late. The officer, his judgment clouded, raised the taser and fired. The sharp sting hit Sam in the back, sending 50,000 volts coursing through his frail body. A scream of pain tore from his throat, and his legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed onto the asphalt. His white cane flew from his hand, skittering under a passing car, while Guide, though terrified, stayed by his side, desperately trying to help him. As Sam lay in the street, spasming from the shock, the scene quickly became chaotic. Officers Miller and Davis rushed forward, not to help the fallen veteran, but to restrain him. Davis grabbed Sam's arms, pulling them behind his back to handcuff him while he was still on the ground, writhing in pain. The crowd gathered around, gasping in disbelief. Some had already begun recording, their phones capturing the unfolding horror. A woman in the crowd screamed, her voice sharp and filled with indignation. "He's blind, you idiots! He's got a service dog!" It didn't take long for the paramedics to arrive, summoned by the frantic calls of bystanders. Sergeant Kelly, a more seasoned officer, stepped out of the police car, taking one look at the situation before her face hardened. The sight of Sam, the taser wire still attached to his body, his service dog whimpering at his side, and the onlookers murmuring in shock left her stunned. "Get those cuffs off him now!" she commanded, her voice firm and without hesitation. She rushed to Sam's side, kneeling down to administer first aid. As she worked, she made another urgent call for an ambulance, her mind already processing the gravity of the situation. "What happened here?" she demanded, turning to the young officers. Miller stammered, struggling to justify his actions. "He wasn't complying, and he was obstructing traffic. We thought he was resisting." Sergeant Kelly's eyes narrowed. She didn't need to hear more. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she knew that the officers had made a catastrophic mistake. But what happened next was something no one could have anticipated. As the paramedics began their work, the first whispers of an extraordinary response started to circulate. A retired Army colonel who had been nearby enjoying his coffee had witnessed the entire incident. His immediate reaction was one of disbelief. He knew the man on the ground was a veteran, and he knew exactly who to call. With urgency, he dialed a direct line to the regional military command, bypassing the usual channels. 7 minutes later, the sound of heavy diesel engines filled the air. It wasn't the usual hum of police vehicles, nor was it the wail of approaching ambulances. This was something much more imposing, a rumble of military precision. The first military vehicle, an olive-drab Humvee, appeared, its lights flashing, not with civilian urgency, but with military purpose. It drove straight through the police perimeter, forcing the officers to scramble out of its way. More vehicles followed, creating an unyielding blockade. Within moments, the intersection was under a silent, powerful military lockdown. Soldiers in full combat fatigues disembarked, sidearms at their sides, taking up positions with unwavering authority. They didn't intervene with the paramedics, but their presence was undeniable. It was as if they had descended to deliver a message. The atmosphere shifted dramatically with the arrival of the military personnel. The streets, once filled with the chaos of sirens and the confusion of the moment, now seemed eerily silent. The soldiers stood firm, their presence not aggressive but commanding, sending a clear message that something had gone terribly wrong. Sergeant Kelly stood in stunned silence as she watched the soldiers take their positions. Her radio crackled with confused calls from dispatch, asking about the unexpected military vehicles blocking a major city intersection. It was clear that the officers had lost control of the situation, but the true depth of their error was still unfolding. From the lead Humvee, a tall, commanding figure emerged, General Michael Vance, the regional commander of the Army forces. His uniform was impeccable, decorated with ribbons that told the story of years of service and leadership. The general's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the scene before him, his gaze fixed firmly on the fallen veteran, Sam Bell. General Vance had been at a nearby military base for a staff meeting when the urgent call about Sam had reached him. His knowledge of the situation was immediate. Sam Bell was not just a citizen. He was a decorated veteran, someone whose sacrifice for the country should have earned respect, not violence. Without hesitation, General Vance strode towards Sergeant Kelly, his movements deliberate and purposeful. His aides struggled to keep pace as he walked, unfazed by the chaos surrounding him. He ignored the confused looks from the officers and the bystanders, his attention focused solely on Sam, who was being carefully lifted onto a stretcher by the paramedics. "Sergeant," General Vance said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "What is the status of Sergeant Samuel Bell?" Sergeant Kelly, though seasoned in her work, was visibly rattled by the sudden and overwhelming presence of the general. She quickly gathered herself and responded, her voice tight. "Mr. Bell is stable, conscious. It appears he was tased during a pedestrian stop. Paramedics are transporting him to City General for evaluation." The general's eyes narrowed as he turned his gaze to Officer Miller and Officer Davis, who were standing stiffly, their faces pale and guilt-ridden. He spoke again, his words deliberate, devoid of any emotion other than quiet condemnation. "Tased," General Vance repeated, his tone icy. "For what offense, Sergeant? Did your officers think it necessary to use a taser on an unarmed, blind, 78-year-old man crossing the street with his service dog?" There was no excuse for what had happened, and General Vance wasn't about to let it slide. He was well aware of the military's responsibility to protect its own, especially veterans who had given so much. His voice, though measured, carried the unmistakable weight of someone who would not tolerate such a failure of judgment. General Vance's question hung in the air, his piercing gaze locked on Officer Miller and Officer Davis, whose stiff postures betrayed their realization of the gravity of their actions. They had misjudged the situation completely, and it was clear that the general was not about to let them off lightly. Vance's voice cut through the tension. "Did either of you identify yourselves before engaging Mr. Bell?" he asked, his tone both calm and sharp, demanding answers. Miller stammered, struggling to respond. "He wasn't responding to commands, sir. He seemed agitated." "Agitated?" Vance interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "Perhaps because he was blind. Perhaps because your blaring PA system disoriented him. And maybe, just maybe, because he was in immediate danger of being run over by a car before one of you decided to shoot him with 50,000 volts." Miller fell silent, unable to offer any defense. Officer Davis stood next to him, looking pale and shaken, his eyes cast downward in shame. General Vance took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the two officers. Sergeant Samuel Bell lost his sight while serving this country in a place most people couldn't even find on a map. He's navigated this city independently for decades with his service dog. And yet today, he was treated with absolute disregard. Not just by you, but by the system that was supposed to protect him. The words hung heavily in the air, and for a moment everything felt still. The soldiers who had surrounded the intersection stood at attention, silent witnesses to the unfolding reckoning. Sergeant Kelly, who had been watching from the sidelines, now turned her gaze toward the two young officers. Her face was set in a grim expression, a silent acknowledgement that the actions of her colleagues had crossed a line. "The actions of these officers," Vance continued, his voice unwavering, "have not only harmed a decorated veteran, but they have shamed this department, and they have undermined the trust that the public places in you." Turning back to Sergeant Kelly, he gave his final orders. "Sergeant, I expect a full, transparent investigation into this incident. Not just from your internal affairs, but I will also be requesting a parallel investigation by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. My office will be closely monitoring both investigations." With that, he gestured to one of his aides who stepped forward with a satellite phone. "I am also requesting that the mayor and the chief of police meet me at City General within the hour. We need to discuss the training protocols for dealing with disabled individuals, particularly veterans, and the appropriate use of force in these situations." General Vance's commanding presence was undeniable. He didn't need to shout or make grand gestures. His calm demeanor and decisiveness were all that was needed to set things in motion. And as the ambulance with Sam inside drove away, it was clear that this was only the beginning of the reckoning that would follow. As the ambulance carrying Sam Bell pulled away from the intersection, General Vance watched it leave, his expression hard and resolute. He stood tall, unmoved by the flurry of activity around him. The military vehicles remained in place, a silent reminder of the power of accountability. The soldiers, calm but vigilant, continued their positions, a symbol of unwavering support for one of their own. The city was beginning to take notice. What had begun as an ordinary, though tragic, misunderstanding was now unfolding into a public spectacle of justice. The streets were still crowded with onlookers, many of them too stunned to speak, their phones still recording the unprecedented scene of military intervention in a civilian matter. It was only a matter of minutes before the fallout began. The mayor and the chief of police arrived at City General Hospital shortly after General Vance. They were visibly shaken, understanding the weight of the moment. The general's presence had left no room for ambiguity. This was not a minor mistake. It was a gross abuse of power. And now both the police and the city would have to answer for it. Inside the hospital, the discussions were swift and direct. The mayor and police chief, under intense pressure, promised immediate reforms. They pledged to implement new protocols for handling disabled individuals, including veterans, with sensitivity and care. The need for better de-escalation techniques and improved training in disability awareness was now at the forefront of their agenda. General Vance's unflinching resolve had ensured that the matter wouldn't be swept under the rug. Meanwhile, footage of the incident had flooded social media, igniting a firestorm of outrage. The online community rallied around Sam, demanding justice for the blind veteran who had been so brutally treated. The story spread quickly, and soon it was not just a local issue. It became a national conversation about the treatment of disabled veterans and the responsibility of law enforcement to protect, not harm, those who had sacrificed so much. Back at the military base, General Vance made sure that Sam's well-being was his priority. He personally oversaw the follow-up care, ensuring that both Sam and Guide were receiving the best possible attention. The emotional trauma Sam had suffered from the taser was not easily erased, but the general made it clear that Sam would not face the recovery process alone. In the weeks that followed, the veterans community rallied around Sam. Letters, visits, and messages of support poured in from other veterans, offering words of solidarity. It was a bittersweet reminder of how the military brotherhood extends far beyond the battlefield, transcending time and distance to offer unwavering support in moments of crisis. The image of the military vehicles blocking the city intersection in response to the unjust treatment of a blind veteran became a powerful symbol, a message that no veteran would ever again be left behind or mistreated without consequence. The image of those Humvees, standing silent but strong, was etched into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it, a reminder of the enduring bond between soldiers and the commitment to protect one of their own. As the dust settled from the chaos of the days following Sam's ordeal, the full scope of what had transpired became clear. The reforms promised by the mayor and the police chief were swiftly enacted, driven by the immense public pressure that followed the incident. A new training program was put into place, focusing on de-escalation techniques and specifically tailored to interactions with individuals with disabilities, particularly veterans. It was a hard lesson for the city, but one that would resonate for years to come. The police department, now facing a wave of scrutiny, worked to repair its image. Officers Miller and Davis were suspended without pay, pending the outcome of multiple investigations. The public, still reeling from the footage of the incident, demanded accountability at every level. The social media outcry had turned into a powerful force, one that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't just about the mistake made that day. It was about ensuring that such an error would never happen again. Meanwhile, Sam's recovery continued. Though the physical effects of the taser faded over time, the emotional scars remained. General Vance, determined to ensure Sam's well-being, personally followed up with his medical care. He made sure that Guide received the attention and comfort needed after the traumatic experience, and that Sam had the emotional support to heal from the ordeal. But for Sam, the journey was far from over. The veterans community surrounded him with love and solidarity, reminding him that he was not alone, that his service had not been forgotten. The same community that had once stood beside him in battle was now standing beside him in his time of need. The strength of that bond became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, no veteran would ever face the world alone. In a quiet moment later, General Vance visited Sam. The general's presence was more than just a leader's visit. It was a quiet promise that no one, no veteran, would ever be left behind again. They spoke briefly. Sam, though exhausted and still shaken, managed a small smile. "No one gets left behind, Sam," General Vance said, his voice low but firm. "Not on my watch. Not ever." And for Sam, in that moment, he knew he wasn't just a man struggling to navigate the world. He was a man who had fought for his country, and now his country would fight for him. As the years passed, the city of Elm learned a painful but necessary lesson. The streets, once bustling with traffic and indifference, became a little safer, a little kinder for all who walked them, especially the most vulnerable. And Sam Bell, who had once walked those streets alone in the darkness, now found his path lit not just by the sounds of his cane tapping, but by the voices of those who would stand with him, ensuring that his journey was one of dignity, respect, and justice. The quiet thunder of military vehicles, once a symbol of intervention, had now become a reminder, an enduring symbol of the strength of the veteran community and the unwavering commitment to never leave anyone behind.